want to introduce you to the inner child, not introduce you because you don't know, but as part of this series and these teachings that I do, it follows nicely after the inner work. If you have not watched the video before, this one, just the previous video, it is titled, What is the Inner Work? I felt that it follows nicely to do the inner child. In fact, I want to do the inner child and the inner teenager. We hardly ever talk about the inner teen, and the inner teen shows up in very interesting ways, and it is often always confused or lumped up as the inner child. So when we talk about the inner child, we are talking about 10 years and younger. The inner child, if I say, oh no, this tapped into my inner child, we are talking about 10 years and younger. The inner teen is obviously from teenhood, and it has a different texture, it has a different expression. And I will talk about that when I do inner teen on its own, because it does deserve the spotlight. We hardly ever touch on it, and it's very important that you understand sometimes when you're going through things that this is the inner teen, this is the inner child, and also your inner 20s, your inner young adult, which I am sort of tapping into as well as I do my work as a life coach. Okay, if you're new here, or even if you're not new, you're old, you've been watching my videos, please do like and subscribe. I forget to say it because, I forget. I really literally forget to say it, but also it makes us feel uncomfortable. It makes me feel uncomfortable to say, please like and subscribe, but please do like and subscribe because apparently it does help when you say it. I've been coached to say you actually have to say it. People forget when you don't say it. So please like and subscribe. Okay, let us begin. What exactly is the inner child? So Carl Gustav Jung, the father of psychology to many people. I mean, I'm a Jungian student. I use a lot of Jungian ways of teaching and coaching. So Carl Jung coined a phrase called the child archetype when he coined all the archetypes. So he coined the child archetype as part of his theory of the collective unconscious. So basically, and I'll do archetypes some other time. If you're interested in archetypes, I do have them as a separate teaching on my Patreon for those of you who are on Patreon. If you're not, it is free to join. And when you are there, you can pick, a subject or a teaching that appeals to you. But yes, archetypes were coined by Carl Jung, and one of them is the child archetype. And the child archetype it's the archetype that represents innocence, potential, and the beginning of individuation. So I'm not going to go deep into Carl Jung's archetypes. I can do that as a separate video some other time. But like I say, you can get some stuff from me on Patreon. But then from that, then the therapists and psychologists that are Jungian scholars that they used then that model to coin the phrase inner child. So inner child is fairly modern, and it is always referred to the part of us that is still children, literally the inner child within us. So like I said, there is the inner child, and we are talking from 10 downwards, and then there's the inner teen from the teens onwards. So today we do the inner child. Let us begin. If my eyes look down, it's because I am looking at my notes. So why the inner child? Why is it a thing? Why do we harp on it as coaches, teachers, psychologists, and so on? We harp on it because the inner child is the part of us that holds our earliest emotional experiences. Our wonder, our joy, our fear, our shame, our unmet needs are first experienced in childhood, which makes sense, right? Because you begin life as a child. So the first time that anything happens to you, good or bad, happens in childhood. And because it happens in childhood, it becomes very foundational. And the inner child does not only refer to trauma, it also refers to joy. So the first time you experience the most happiest thing, or the first time you discovered that you love music, or the first time you were moved deeply by something, the first time you were the happiest, the first time you were amazed and, something really just blew your mind in the best way, it's usually in childhood. It can never happen in teenhood necessarily. It can never happen in adulthood. Usually, you experience almost the entire emotional landscape in childhood. So, like I say, your deepest fears, when we go deep, they find foundation, or origins in childhood. Your deepest shame finds its root in childhood. Your deepest guilt in childhood. Almost everything that is emotionally heavy or emotionally exhilarating, you can almost always find it in childhood, sometimes in teenagehood. And like I say, I will talk about the inner teen in the next video. Childhood is also the place where we learn to relate with other people. We learn to adjust, morph, put masks, change, shape, shift in order to be validated, to be approved of, to be liked, to be to be approved of, to be palatable to who? To the adults. And the reason is that as a child, when you are a child, you are literally in survival mode for obvious reasons. You are little, you don't work, you can't live alone, you can't fend for yourself. So you rely heavily, almost 100% upon the adults in your life. Your parents, if you grew up with mommy and daddy, your mom, or the guardians, the adults, the grown-ups in the world were the ones that are taking care of you. They were feeding you, they were clothing you, they made sure you were safe, you were warm, you had shelter, and so on and so forth. So as a child, because you're a human being and you have a reptilian brain and you are hardwired to survive, you do everything in your power to make sure that you survive. Even though as a child, you don't look at it as survival. Even as adults, when we look at children, we are not referring to them as, yeah, no, survival. But innately, reptilian brain-wise, they are wired to survive. You're in survival mode. So how does that happen? For an example, let me use the example of living with a mom and dad just for ease of the video. So this is you start to recognize what makes mommy happy, what makes mommy upset, what makes mommy moody, you start to learn that, oh, if I do this, mommy gets happy. Excuse me, if I do that, mommy gets upset. If I don't do that, she becomes neutral. You learn that, and you learn also how your father responds to things. And as a survival mechanism, you become the people pleaser, you become avoidant, you become the quiet one, you become the shy one, or you become the performer. I mean, there's many child archetypes, because then you morph into an archetype. An archetype is a way of being to survive, which is why a child archetype is known as a survival archetype. Apologies for being technical. Please just bear with me. It's hard sometimes to just explain these things. So you morph, you shapeshift, you become whatever you think will make you what? Survive. But then you grow up. You grow up, and if you have not outgrown those patterns, those ways of being, you remain a child in your way of relating to other people. So how do you know that you are still operating from the inner child? Or rather, how do you know that the inner child is running your life? And the inner child might run a particular part of your life, not your entire life. For an example, at work, you could be a full-on adult, or you could be a teen. You'll love the inner teen, by the way. But in your relationships, you go back to being a child. Your relationships are run by the 9-year-old you. How do you know that there's the inner child, there's the 9-year-old, 7-year-old that needs to be reparented? And the phrase reparenting is a word that's used in psychology. I'll explain it some other time, because I'll do a video on its own on how to reparent the inner child. So otherwise it's going to get too long. So how do you know that you might have to deal with the inner child? First of all, if you struggle with conflict, or conflict gets you extremely overwhelmed in a way that it makes you not show up as the adult that you are. It makes you sulk, it makes you do silent treatments, it makes you storm out, it makes you lash out, it makes you cry even though you're not in danger. Just dealing with conflict, confrontation, or it makes you freeze. In other words, if you don't face a conflict or a confrontation in a way that is healthy, where you are using your words and you are listening and you are sharing, if you can't do that, if you get, especially if people, and some people say it proudly, even on social media, that, oh, no, I'm afraid of conflict. I stay away from conflict. That it's a child, because perhaps as a 7-year-old, conflict really froze you up, or it made you run, or whatever, or you saw an adult respond to conflict in a particular way. So that if you can't do proper conflict resolution, where you call a spade, where you share what's truly happening, where you communicate clearly, you know that there's an inner child lurking there, because conflict used to threaten what? Your survival as a child. Secondly, fear of abandonment. I mean, in the South African context in particular, abandonment is a deep, deep fear because of how the system was. You know, a lot of our parents, especially my age group and slightly older, and maybe even people in their 80s, our parents often had to leave us alone. They would be at work, you'd come home, there's no mom, you'd have to look after younger siblings if you were a firstborn or so, or you were left with grandparents at home, or you had to live in another town while your mother works, go to kitchening as a domestic worker, your father was in the mines. Like there's a collective abandonment issue that we as Black South Africans would have to deal with. So our fear of abandonment shows up a lot in how we relate, how we attach, and that is an inner child issue that needs to be reparented, where we need to tell the inner child that, Nana, listen, we are no longer 7. We are not abandoned by anyone. We are good. We are working. We have money. We are fine. And it takes certain rituals, certain steps to get to reparent your child so that you don't always enact it. You don't enter a relationship already with an abandonment mentality, knowing that out. So it usually, and it's subconscious, by the way, it's not a conscious thing. You enter a relationship thinking you are conscious, thinking you are falling in love. Meanwhile, it is the 9-year-old is right there saying, "Wabona mo, I'm going to be left." And then you start doing very weird things to recreate that abandonment situation. You see, that's usually the inner child. What did I say here on my notes? Please forgive me. When I look down, I'm looking at my notes. Deep shame. If you struggle with deep shame and even guilt, it's usually the inner child, 10 to 9, I mean 10 to 0. It's usually the inner child because a lot of things happen to us in that, period that causes a lot of shame. Another thing that brings about a lot of shame is poverty or not having things. A lot of us come from poverty, and you'd find that you don't have the things that other people have. And that carries a lot of shame because at school you would not have shoes while other children had shoes. That is deep, deep shame, and especially if it's in primary. In teenagers, it's you hardly ever find a teenager having those type of problems. It's usually from 10 to 0 because as a teenager you can make a plan. You have started to individuate, so you will hardly ever walk barefoot to school. You would have made a plan, or if you do, you don't care anymore. But people will be laughing at you, or you don't have the right scafftin. Some people are eating bologna and cheese and white bread, and you have your brown bread with just butter or achar. And that caused you a lot of shame that you still carry. And I'm not laughing. I swear I'm not laughing. That caused you a lot of shame that you still carry at 38, 35, 40, and so on. That is inner child. So shame and guilt. Guilt also comes from just the things that you used to do to survive, as I mentioned earlier, causes a lot of guilt. Sometimes a lot of children steal and do very weird things to be recognized, to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be approved of. And that guilt, you carry it into adulthood if you do not deal with it. So when you come for coaching or when you go for therapy, these are the things that they would ask you to unearth so that we can reparent. The process of reparenting is to actually go within to deal with the 9-year-old, to deal with the 5-year-old, to hold them, to take care of them, because all they want is to be taken care of. Trust me, guys, the 7-year-old still lives wild and loud inside of you, especially if you are not taking care of it. Okay. What else? The big one, difficulty receiving love, difficulty trusting. So trust issues are childhood issues, are inner child issues. Inner child, inner child. If you're unable to trust that you are loved, that you belong, that you are safe, that you are cared for, it is inner child because of how your home environment was, how mommy and daddy was, how daddy kept saying he'll come back and he wouldn't come back. In your child's mind, that is, you can't trust that, especially if you had a father who worked in the country or body mining and they had to dodge you because you'd fall apart if daddy says, "I'm literally leaving, I'll see you in March." And then daddy says, "No, no, Yeah, don't do that thing, guys. If I don't think you guys do that. Millennials, you guys are smart. I like you. Yeah, if don't dodge a child, tell a child straight. Akampe alle. You just say, I am not coming back. I'll see you in a month or so. Don't dodge the child or run away. Back in the days, parents used to do that, knowing that the child is clingy, and then they would maybe say to the child, go to the kitchen and do this, and then the guy would disappear or the mom would disappear. That is trauma to children. That is big, big trauma to children that hits on the trust issues. So not trusting love, not trusting good things, not trusting that this amazing thing is indeed happening to me is inner child issues. So that's the inner child. And how do you heal the inner child? How do you deal with the inner child? Reparenting, which you will get through your coach, through your therapy. But you can even Google these things these days and just find out, how do I reparent? However, I do recommend a coach, because sometimes just reading they wouldn't take you as deep as you need to go, and you wouldn't sometimes they would hold you as you unravel. That's the beauty of holding space and coaching and so on. Yeah, so this is it on the inner child. Let me see if I've left anything out. Yeah, the inner child brings, it holds rather both wounds and gifts. The beauty side of the inner child is that you'd find that at your earliest, in fact, let me put it this way. When a client does not know what their purpose is, or they're disillusioned, or they are having some form of midlife crisis, I don't know what I'm doing. Yes, I'm making money. Yes, I'm this big senior person, but I don't know. I don't think this is my calling. I don't think this is my purpose. I always take them to inner child that, do you remember what it is that you really, 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 truly loved as a child? And then we build on that. They always find something, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense, or or they've outgrown that thing. Somehow it becomes building blocks to whatever it is that they feel that they could be doing. And half the time, I always say that doesn't mean you need to leave your job as it is. What it means is that you need to be doing that in your spare time. Excuse me. So in other words, it's not so much that leave your job and do the thing that, your calling is. A lot of people have bonds and cars and commitments and bills to pay. They can't just stop. I always say that doesn't mean leave your work. It simply means that you have to carve out time and space to do your calling. If it means, your calling is linked to helping the youth, join someone or support a cause that does that, and donate something, maybe do some lectures. Use your spare time to do the thing that was placed in your heart, instead of, flipping social media or watching Netflix or going to restaurants or doing the same. Also, do something meaningful with your time. I'm finding that people in senior management and people who are sort of actualized in terms of career have that gaping hole that, yeah, I think I'm on the wrong. Sometimes it's not wrong. I mean, if it pays your bills and you live well, let's appreciate that. But then carve some space so that you do the work, or you support something beyond you. Yeah, that's a little bit of a tangent. But yeah, I hope that this gives you an idea of why we have the inner child. And if you need help with the inner child, please do not hesitate to email me, or just join my community on Patreon. There's tons and tons of content, over 250 something pieces of content, from written, audio, and a lot of videos that are not here on YouTube. YouTube is just fresh videos introducing myself. Okay, and this is my story. I cannot wait to hear yours.